You're listening to the Biohackers World Podcast.
Hey everybody, I'm Shimite Obialo, contributor at Forbes, principal at OBI Advisors, where I feature and work with companies in the health and wellness space, particularly those that have scaled and accessed venture capital. And I am so fortunate to be sitting here with Dave Korsunsky. Dave, you gave an incredible presentation this morning about your company, Heads Up. And I think it would be great for you to share with the folks here who are viewing Biohackers World Conference Miami a little bit more about you, about your journey into the biohacking space.
Yeah, thank you, Shimite. Well, I got into this whole industry pretty early. It was probably 2011, 2012 when the stuff we call biohacking didn't even really have a name yet. It was nascent. But I started finding ways to make significant improvements in my own health that I was able to do on my own, at home, and test and validate. And I started seeing that just with a little bit of data from my body, biofeedback, it was helping me make some really significant adjustments, areas that I didn't even know needed adjustments. So the deeper I got into it, I started capturing more data. Back in those days, we didn't have all the sensors and all of the diagnostics that we have now. But you could still get your blood work run. You could still go get what are called DEXA scans, which are like advanced body composition scans. You could still measure things like your nutrition intake, blood sugar, dietary protocol. So there was all of these inputs, basically, and then I was measuring outputs, the efficacy. And the more I got into it, the more I realized there's incredible technology out there and information out there for us as individuals collectively to optimize our health, but there were no ways for me to see the full picture. It was too complicated to synthesize all the information out there. I lived in the Bay Area at that time, and I had a patient portal in Palo Alto, a patient portal in San Francisco. I had blood work at Quest, blood work at LabCorp, DEXA scans, and it was just a mess. So the engineer in me said, how do we solve said mess? And I started building this company to basically give people agency over the health, give them biofeedback for a few reasons. One, so that you can make a change to your health and know that you're doing it safely. That's the first thing. Know that you're doing it effectively. And then just continue on the journey and make progressive updates as you go. And that was just a data problem. So that's how Heads Up was born. It was, how can we make better choices with the data we already have that's underutilized?
Got it. And one of the interesting, something that somebody mentioned at the very end of your talk was that they actually do have an Oura ring. They've had one for several years. They have gotten blood tests done, but that doesn't necessarily mean they understand what's really going on from an analytical perspective. And so I'd love for you to share how exactly it is that you are pulling in all of this disparate data from fragmented sources and then further analyzing and creating that unified blueprint that you talked about.
That's the part that nobody sees, and that was actually the hardest problem to solve from a technical point of view, because we basically had to start figuring out how to get all these pipes connected in this healthcare industry. And the problem was none of the pipes existed. So if you think about the U.S. healthcare system, we have, 10, 20, 30,000 different health systems and doctors' offices and medical providers. None of those are really interconnected in a way that allows for easy data exchange. So the first problem you have to figure out is, how do you even solve a fundamental problem in the U.S. healthcare system? Because every health system uses its own system. They use these systems called electronic health record systems, EHRs. There's probably 500 different ones you can pick from as a medical practice.
You have the big ones.
Big ones, Epic,
Cerner, and then Athena.
GE, Meditech, Athena. And then there's a long tail of thousands of smaller ones. So none of them really, as a patient, there's no way to get data from all of those put together. So the first problem was, how do you get our medical records connected? Like for me, that's the most important data I have for my time above ground. That determines my quality of life, my lifespan, my health span. But the system's not built in a way that allows me to look at that information longitudinally. And most of the diseases we deal with as a society today, they don't show up overnight when you get the diagnosis. They've actually been building for 10 or 15 years prior before you tip into a range where you're diagnosed. But how can you catch it early if you can't see the historical data? So that was problem one, is like, how do we get that plumbing mess solved? And the US government made a big regulatory change, and they basically incentivized doctors to move and put all of our medical records online in patient portals. So now at least we had API connections, so systems like mine could pull that data out. That was 2014 when these APIs became available. That was the first time we could solve this massive fundamental problem. And then it was this explosion of sensors and wearables that came in. Oura rings, scales, CGMs. What this allowed us to do was we don't have to wait to go to the doctor anymore to get biofeedback. We get it every single day as soon as we wake up. But that's its own plumbing problem. Okay, now you have this proliferation of sensors and none of that data is connected, so you have to solve that problem. And then you have to actually build a user experience on top of it that people can use and will pay money for. Because it's going to cost me 10, 20, $30 million to go build this thing. And if the average person can't figure it out, or if it's too technical, or if they can't read the data, you have no business and you're dead. So behind the scenes, to make it all pretty was like the real engineering challenge of the whole thing. And that's what we've been working on for the last 10 years. That's how we can, to your point on the question, take someone's blood work from Function Health, overlay it with their Oura ring data, and give someone an insight and say, your Oura data is showing patterns of chronic stress, and we see that in your blood work with these markers. That's what I talked about. That was my pattern. And here's some things you can try to reverse the pattern. So.
And, you know, I know we talked about how the business started more of a consumer-facing product offering. And now it's more of that B2B where your customers are actually like health clinics, longevity clinics, primary care clinics. Can you talk about that transition and also in conjunction where you actually have raised venture capital? You started out raising 2.2 million, I think, in seed and have now gone on to raise approximately $12 million. So can you talk about that shift of being more of a consumer-facing platform to more of that B2B and, you know, also scaling with venture?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of companies in the wellness space that start direct to consumer, and they get their user experiences figured out, and then they go B2B. So we weren't unique in that regard. When I first started out, I was also a little bit too early. Like a lot of founders, you see the future, but you see it a little bit too early and the market's not there yet. So I was building this product for consumers and I was seeing really good traction data from the people using it. And I was getting really good subscription revenue. I had really good unit economics, but I still, at that time, it was very hard for investors to make the leap into investing in digital health. There was like this wave of digital health investments like 2012 to 14 when some of the first wearables came out, and they did not provide very good outcomes for the investors. So then digital health went through like this dark period where there was not a ton of funding, and that's kind of when I got in. So I got in at like a really challenging time in digital health. Yeah, so the consumer thing was going good, but I still couldn't get the investment capital I needed. I tried and tried and tried. Most investors told me no one's ever going to pay for your product. I can't tell you how many times I heard that. And I proved everybody wrong. People paid. It was solving huge problems. Like I had people I could show reversal of diabetes on the system, like within 3 months. So like it was all there. Couldn't raise the money for direct to consumer. One of the investors on our seed round, our angel round, he said, Dave, I love what you're doing. I will fund the company, but I want you to pivot. And I want you to sell through clinics. So it was partly the industry not being ready, partly just not having a lot of leverage at that point where we were. So we pivoted, and that ended up being actually a really positive move for us. So I guess the pivot was kind of like out of necessity. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times it is, the capital that sort of like drives.
It's either pivot or you're out of business,
Right.
basically.
And at this point, I know you said to me just before that you'd raised $12 million to date. The business has grown substantially. Could you talk a little bit about now the scale that you're at in terms of customers, partners that you have, different data providers like Aura, Whoop, et cetera, and if you can share some of your revenue?
Yeah, the whole industry has exploded over the last few years, and one of the benefits of being early is we've built really good relationships with all of these partners and customers. We're actually now in the midst of another major pivot. So that's the pivot with AI. So it's still the same. I wouldn't call it, I guess it is. It's a completely different way of bringing the product to market. We're now an AI company. So that's like the third leg of the stool. I can't get into revenue specifically, but I can say that the industries that we're in are seeing exponential growth. I think the benefit for us, having been in this industry as long as we have all of these really great partnerships and relationships, like the one with Biohackers World. We've been with this organization since the beginning. So right now, Shimite, it's kind of like, you're still flying with no compass, quite honestly. It's all still changing so fast, and it's really just one day at a time right now.
It's amazing. I think I saw some data, but it was old, that you had like 40,000 customers in 60 countries.
There's users all over the world.
Right.
And one of the surprising things, I think I mentioned this to you maybe when we chatted before, but when we built the system, we thought it was going to be for biohackers, because that's what I was. What we found as we got into it and looking at the user data was the users who were most engaged were actually the least technically savvy people you could imagine, but they didn't want to be on 5 medications anymore. And they knew that they were listening to podcasts and they were part of groups online that were managing those conditions in alternative ways. And so it was like 55-year-old Ginny from Bend, Oregon, who's just crushing it in our system and having incredible success. So it's just been incredibly rewarding to see the changes that can be made with this type of healthcare as well. And now we're on to the next chapter with the AI part. And
with AI, can you be a little bit more specific on how you're leveraging AI? Because you've got so much data that you're pulling in, and we understand the power of AI to do predictive analytics and some of that longitudinal assessment of our personal health. But can you clarify how it is that you're now leveraging AI to further the goals of the platform?
Yeah, that was the talk I gave. I really wanted to bring it down to just like, okay, as someone sitting at home who's hearing this term thrown around everywhere nowadays, what does that even mean for me as someone who's just trying to be the best version of myself, physically, mentally, spiritually? So let's just use that example of Ginny, who, and that's a real person, she's a real case study on our website. Grandma is very comfortable with ChatGPT at this point. And what we want to be able to do is connect the data from these individuals to a system. I'll just use ChatGPT, but there's others. Now, if Grandma could log in and all of her blood sugar readings were synced and the LLM could read it, and it could help her find patterns in the data and make recommendations on changes that were the most plain English, accessible, easy to understand. AI can write these recommendations better than a doctor can. They just write them in a way that's more accessible. It's really just demystified, plain English, simple language. So can we make it easy for people to ask questions about their health and have AI aware of their health data and then be able to make simple and profound recommendations. That was the basis of the talk I gave. It's like, hey, I know I have my medical blood work from my doctor. I know I'm tracking my blood sugar as a diabetic, and maybe I'm tracking my carbohydrate intake as a diabetic. Find patterns for me that can take me to the next level. Make recommendations for me that I hadn't thought about. So it's like having a best friend in your pocket that's a medical super expert that can look at your medical information and give you simple, actionable recommendations to take. And also, as I mentioned in the presentation, it's not a diagnostic tool. It's a hypothesis tool. So it might give you a suggestion on something to try, and then you can take that suggestion to your clinician and make sure that that's actually the right thing to do. So I think it's just going to be a really powerful, simple, and accessible companion for people who are trying to make changes.
And given some of the challenges with AI in terms of hallucinations, how are you, we talk about guardrails a lot with AI, but how are you sort of mitigating against that risk when the tool is being used to, in a sense, do some hypothesizing, some predicting based on some analytics and data that it's finding inside of this pool of data on a particular patient or person?
Yeah. There's always risk that people are going to get bad information online, whether that comes from your Facebook group or from AI. So I think trust but verify is going to be relevant in this recommendation as well. I gave an example in my talk of where it provided some data from a PDF that was just flat out wrong. So that's also where I want to recommend that this is a companion and not your clinician. So use it for exploratory reasons, have fun with it. You can get bad information in lots of places these days, and we can do things to our health that doesn't work. I can't tell you how many biohacking experiments I've done that have blew up in my face. So acquire information and ask yourself, does that resonate with what I think I should do? That's also why we're such big advocates of tracking. Because if you're trying something and you measure it, you're going to know very quickly if it's working or not. And then also, what I mentioned in the presentation, another great thing about AI is you can say, hey, this is a great hypothesis. Can you summarize it for me so I can take it to my doctor? I think that's how the tool should be used.
It's not a replacement, but a companion in partnership with clinicians and providers.
Yeah, I interviewed this woman on my podcast one time. She was an epileptic, and she gave me a great quote. She's like, Dave, I found the problem to my epileptic seizures on PubMed. And through the process of researching on PubMed, I found out they were being triggered by severe hormonal fluctuations. And she said, your doctor is not going to be researching your problem on PubMed. You are. So in a sense, AI is just like a better PubMed, where you can go in there and do some of your own research. You may spend 2 or 3 hours researching your health online with the help of AI. And that's 2 to 3 hours of research that, sadly, a clinician doesn't have time to do. They're not sitting at home on the weekend trying to figure out the root cause of Shimite's seizures. They can treat you, but it's up to you to go to those next 3 or 4 or 5 levels deeper to actually find root cause. And I think we just have more powerful tools to do that now.
Perfect. Well, I certainly look forward to seeing the growth and continued progress of Heads Up in terms of the predictive analytics, the precision medicine, and all of the above.
Biohacking.
And the biohacking.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure to talk to you, Dave.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so thank you all for tuning in.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Biohackers World is one of my favorite conferences. It's so impressive. It attracts such an amazing crowd and community. We're going to be back in LA in 2026. You don't want to miss it.